I was telling your wife, Mr. Bugler, I'm no lady.
Ah. Well, listen, how you earn this 50 is no business of mine. I will just say thank you, miss, unless you girls like to be called Ms.
Why don't you call me Mr.?
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood. Hey, Brad, so I have a confession to make. I have a mea culpa to make to you and to our listener.
Thought he knew everything about you, so I can't wait to hear this.
Oh, God, there's lots you don't know about me. So remember a couple weeks ago when we did the Mary Tyler Moore episode and we were talking about All in the Family, and I said that it's difficult for me to watch All in the Family because it's so of its time?
Yes.
Unlike the Mary Tyler Moore show?
Yes.
Well, I was wrong because I watched All in the Family all this past week, and I got to tell you, I loved it. I loved it. I was amazed. I always appreciated the acting. Yes, that's what I said in the Mary Tyler Moore episode is I can watch it for the acting. But it was so wonderful, and particularly these two episodes that we're going to talk about today on Going Hollywood of All in the Family. But we have a special guest host joining us today, and I want you to introduce him, Brad.
If you remember, Tony, we had the discussion of whether we're a gay podcast or we're a general audience podcast, and we were fine either way, but we need to decide. And we decided we're going to be a general audience podcast. And by choosing to do so...
with a definite gay twist.
Yes. We agreed that we wouldn't just do gay film and television all the time. And then here we bring in the guy that's an expert in gay television history.
Oh, God.
And here we have Matt Baume, who wrote an incredible book that you and I both enjoyed called Honey, I'm Homo. In addition, he is a YouTube sensation. And how many podcasts do you have, Matt? I believe it's 2.
Yes.
2 right now. I've got The Sewers of Paris and Matt's SoCast Pod, where I talk about the show My So-Called Life.
Oh, I love that.
I have never seen My So-Called Life, but if you're doing a podcast on it, I think it's time I start.
I would be remiss to mention that Matt's book, Honey, I'm Homo, recently won the Lambda Award, which is such a wonderful, prestigious award. And we are very thrilled and honored to have you on the podcast, Matt. Welcome.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
It is well-deserved, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Now, Matt, I want to get your opinion on something for somebody that's been doing this for a while. Mm-hmm. Tony and I have been having a debate about
Spoiler debate.
Most of what we discuss on this show are movies and television before 1990, though we do make exceptions.
Right.
So we've been wondering if it's necessary to do a spoiler alert given the time. What do you think?
I think we're probably, well, here's the thing, is that the show originally aired in the 1970s, and everybody has had a lot of time to get caught up on it. However, it's not something that I think is in the zeitgeist necessarily. Not a lot of people are like, hey, did you see that episode of All in the Family? So I don't know. I think now's a great time for people who haven't checked it out yet to give it a shot, to see it for the first time.
This is becoming a recurring character on this show, whether or not we have a spoiler alert. But anyway.
We'll shelve it once again and we'll discuss it further.
We will discuss it further for a 50-year-old show. So yes, we're talking about 2 episodes, actually one regular-sized episode and one mega-sized episode of All in the Family, involving the character of Beverly LaSalle, who was a character who was brought on All in the Family. I believe the very first episode she was brought on All in the Family was the first one we're going to talk about, which is Archie the Hero, which aired on September 29th, 1975. But I just want to, first of all, before we go any further, Matt, your book, Honey, I'm Homo, which basically deals with the history of gay characters on television, in sitcoms and in hour-long shows. You reference hour-long shows, too. Mm-hmm. I was so impressed with the research and your stories, particularly the episodes that I never even occurred to me, because I know a little bit about gays on television. And I never thought of, one of the ones that I just want to briefly mention is the Bewitched episode.
Yeah.
You discuss, though, it's The Witches Are Out. Is that correct?
Yeah, really early in the series run. Yes.
Yeah, like the first season.
Mhm.
And how could you just tell our listener a little bit of background about the book and how you approached it and what you discussed in the book?
Yeah, so the book, Hi Honey, I'm Homo, it's basically goes all the way back to some early sitcoms and tells the story of queer characters on American sitcoms, and also how those shows, those beloved comedy shows, did a lot to both reflect what was going on in real life with queer liberation, and also wound up having a big impact on just the fight for equality and rights, and queer people being able to live comfortably in the world. We tend to think of sitcoms as being just like, jokey, fun times. And they are that. It's a great, way to just spend time with characters that you love. But hidden within all of those shows, there's this incredible story that spans, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It tells this amazing story of like what actual queer people were experiencing in their lives. So the book is an effort to, both, pay homage to those shows and how funny they were. And also shine a light on the story that they tell when you step back and look at the whole big grand story that these sitcoms are telling.
Yeah, I think what struck me about the book and what really made me think is, and this is something that, and I'm probably going to bastardize this quote, so pardon me, but Steve Martin said something along the lines about the best way to get a serious message across is through comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so true when you think about, particularly, you give an example of Will and Grace. And how when Joe Biden actually, when he was the first one to kind of flip his opinion on gay marriage, cited Will and Grace, a TV sitcom, as having changed, maybe not changed his mind, but brought it to the American public in a way that it was relatable, and that many people change their minds through a sitcom. So I think that's so astounding, and I love that your book discusses the effect that a situation comedy can have on the history of the world, basically.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Like Joe Biden, it really shocked a lot of people when he both came out like very vocally in favor of marriage equality in this one interview, and also credited Will and Grace for all the social change that he said. And I agree with him that he said they helped move along. There's been a lot of research on this as well, not to get too academic about it, but the short version of the story is that there's some researchers who noticed that, like, wow, television seems to have a big effect on people's lives. Yeah. They did some studies. They were able to identify there's this effect that they call the parasocial contact hypothesis, that basically, like boiling this down and not getting too wonky about it, is that when a viewer tends to think of characters on television as something like friends, that they have characters that they recognize and they know well, and they know who these people are, and they enjoy spending time with them through the screen, that it can have a similar effect to knowing diverse people in their real lives. So obviously it's quite different, but the effect of like turning on the TV once a week, Thursday night, and seeing Will and Grace, seeing some gay people in your life, is in some ways comparable to having queer people in your real life, a coworker that you see, or, a family member that you occasionally run into.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It makes it all very relatable.
Especially if there's no out people in your life, which based on where we live, it's hard for me to imagine, but that's very true of some people, and very often because of where they live.
Yeah. By the time, going back to this episode of All in the Family, but by the time these episodes were airing, pretty close to everybody, like the overwhelming majority of Americans, had a television in their home. And at this time, there were only 3 major networks. So it was pretty likely if you turned on a television, you would be watching something that tens of millions of other people were simultaneously watching. So one queer character for just a few minutes in a half-hour show could reach millions of people and have it was an incredible opportunity, let's say, for publicity.
A profound impact.
And it was big news.
Yeah, absolutely.
And was also extremely funny.
Yeah.
Yes. This first episode we're going to talk about, Archie the Hero, aired in 1975. That's only 2 years after we all became sane overnight.
Exactly.
Homosexuality was deemed no longer a mental illness.
It is.
Oh, it really is. Yeah. That, we went from this period of being pathologized, and obviously this wasn't like an instantaneous thing. Like all doctors everywhere were like, oh, okay, you're fine now.
Right.
There's still a lot of work to be done. But
still is.
That we go from this phase where you can look at the DSM, the manual for all medical practitioners, that says, oh, homosexuality, that's a disease. It needs to be cured. Suddenly, no, it's fine. It doesn't need to be cured. There could be other problems that homosexual people can have. But hey, doctors, stop trying to ungay them.
Right. Exactly. In one of these episodes with Beverly LaSalle, Archie even says that to Edith at one point about you can change these people. It's not that hard to change these people. He suggested he put pants on. So I think that's obviously the prevailing attitude even in the 70s, but we were making progress with it.
Mm-hmm.
So since you brought up All in the Family, let's talk a little bit about it. And I'm just going to give like a Cliff Notes version of the history of All in the Family because I like to do it. And I just think it helps people put things in context because we had an episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and we talked about how the Mary Tyler Moore Show was revolutionary, helped revolutionize television along with this other show on CBS, leading it off on Saturday night, All in the Family. So All in the Family was developed by Norman Lear, the late, great Norman Lear, modeled on the British sitcom Till Death Us Do Part. And it's basically the same structure of a working class conservative Joe, i.e. bigot, pitted against his liberal son-in-law. And it was a big hit in the UK, and Norman Lear heard of it and saw it, and he thought it reminded him very much of his own personal relationship with his father. So he wanted to develop a series for American television. And he developed a pilot for ABC in 1968, and it was called Justice for All. Mm-hmm. And the character's name was Archie Justice. And it was some of the people who were considered for playing it were Tom Bosley, Jack Warden, and Jackie Gleason. And someone turned it down. One of your favorite people, Brad, turned it down because he considered it un-American. And that's your pal Mickey Rooney, Brad. He didn't want to play Archie Justice.
And, we had that whole discussion about Mickey Rooney when we did Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I'll be nice. He's not one of my favorite people. So
he's not. I'm being completely.
He was considered for this role because Archie is the buff in this show because of his prejudice, and I don't see Mickey Rooney ever getting that.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting choice, but anyway, they all turned it down. So it was actually Carol O'Connor, who had been a character actor for years in Hollywood. He's in Cleopatra. It's kind of funny to see Archie Bunker in ancient Rome. But anyway, Carol O'Connor was a journeyman actor in all kinds of TV shows, all kinds of films. He won the role of Archie Justice. This is the first pilot, alongside the character actress Jean Stapleton, who is a very active Broadway actress. She was in Funny Girl. She was in Bells Are Ringing. She was a journeyman actress. So they shot the first pilot
Damn Yankees.
ABC. Yes, Damn Yankees, exactly. So they shot the first pilot. ABC wasn't crazy about it. They actually gave them money to reshoot the pilot again, which I think is phenomenal, that they'd say, we do this again. They recast the parts of the two younger characters, the Mike and Gloria parts, and they retitled the show Those Were the Days. And they cast, it was still with O'Connor and Stapleton, but this time it had Candy Azara, who people will recognize from shows like Soap and Rhoda and Who's the Boss, and Chip Oliver. And then they did the pilot, and then ABC got cold feet. And just about the time that ABC got cold feet and backed out, CBS stepped up, and CBS was doing their big rural purge. They got rid of all the rural shows, the Beverly Hillbillies, the Green Acres, the Petticoat Junctions, because they wanted their network to have a different look, to appeal to contemporary urban viewers. So they bought the show from ABC, retitled it All in the Family, recast the Mike and Gloria part with Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers, and shot a third pilot. And what's interesting about All in the Family is it was the very first American series to be videotaped, not filmed, but videotaped before a live studio audience without a laugh track. Many shows in the 60s were single cameras with a laugh track. All in the Family videotaped before a live audience. Most shows were filmed before a studio audience. And the videotape gave All in the Family a grittiness and a realness that suited its subject matter, incredibly well. So the show was not a success at first. It was a mid-season replacement. It premiered on January 12th, 1971. Didn't really do very well. It was actually in the death time slot that CBS had originally given to Mary Tyler Moore, right before Hee Haw. But Fred Silverman believed in the show. He ran it over the summer on Saturday night, and bingo, it started to pick up viewers. It became, on Saturday nights at 8 o'clock, a phenomenon. It was the number one show for 5 consecutive seasons. That's a record it held until The Cosby Show in the 80s. So you really can't overstate the phenomenon that All in the Family was in the 70s. I remember it incredibly well. Do you remember it? You remember it, don't you, Brad? You said it was one of your favorite shows.
Yes, as I said before, I was politically aware at way too young of an age because this was my favorite show and I was probably 8, maybe 9 tops years old. And I was just totally turned on by the politics of the show and their concern about the environment and Watergate. So yeah, that's why I fell in love with this show and I was bowled over by it and I loved it. And the same reason I fell in love with Doonesbury comic books from a very, very early age. I guess I was kind of a boring kid if it comes down to it. I don't think we watched it as much as we would have liked to. My dad thought it was funny, but he didn't like all the yelling, I believe. So I watched it as much as I could.
What was your first memory of it, Matt? Do you remember? Do you recall?
You know, that's a great question because it wasn't in reruns. I didn't catch it in syndication. I remember when I was young, meaning around probably like 10 or so, I saw some ad for the Jeffersons, which was actually a spinoff from All in the Family. And as a kid, I had actually confused it with the Jetsons, and I thought it was like a cartoon. And I was like, "Oh, I want to watch that." And I remember being like really baffled when my parents were like, "Oh no, that's something else. That's something different. We don't want you to watch the show because it's a lot of themes that we don't think you're ready to watch."
Right.
So I'm trying to remember the first time I would have seen the show. It probably would have been as an adult, probably through some streaming service. Because, you know, I think like one of you might have said earlier, like there's this, I think, assumption that because it's so of its time, it's so of the 70s and so about 70s issues that it might not age well. But the thing about it is that the characters are so perfect. Characters are so well drawn. I think it ages great.
Well, that was our discussion when I had said that it was difficult for me to watch it, and as opposed to the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And I was proven completely wrong this week when I went back and revisited it because I was I'm always blown away by the performances. Gene Stapleton and Carol O'Connor. Carol O'Connor won 4 Emmys. Gene Stapleton won 3 Emmys. These are such brilliant performances. And I totally take that back. I think it was such a wonderful experience to revisit these people. And these stories, and I really feel like I'm reborn into the All in the Family, into loving All in the Family.
I think it would do great today, like if it was, I don't know about remade as a sitcom, because I think people's tastes right now are not leaning towards like the 3-camera, 3-wall studio audience sitcom. I think people just find that a little passé. But I think my dream is for someone to resurrect it as live theater. Like I think it would do great. I would love to see some like, I don't know, local rep company take it on so that like it's something like every Friday night for, 12 weeks, they do a different episode of the series. And every Friday night, the audience comes back to see a different episode of All in the Family done live for them on stage. I don't know, like the financials of that probably wouldn't make any sense, but I would enjoy it as an audience member.
Well, they kind of tried 704 Hauser. Do you remember that show?
Oh boy. Yeah, I know that there have been returns. Yeah.
Well, it kind of sort of was a spinoff, but it wasn't really. I would say it's the first spinoff where the character was a house that they spun off. Because a black family moved into the old bunker house and the father was liberal and the son was conservative, and it just didn't really work. It was an interesting idea, and they tried to make it work, and they even brought Joey, Mike and Gloria's son, back to look at the house for nostalgia's sake, and it just didn't. It was bad. And Matt, do you remember what year that was?
I want to say that was around 94, 95 or so.
Oh, so it was longer ago than I thought it was.
It was 94. It was April and May of 94.
That it had Maura Tierney right before she was on news radio, and also brought in John Amos playing a different character. But he was, I want to say he played the husband on Maude, not Maude's husband, but he played, I've forgotten her name, but the first maid. He was yes.
James Evans on Good Times.
Yeah, that's it.
He was on the Mary Tyler Moore Show for a little while as Gordy the Weatherman, and they were going to expand his role, but then he ended up going over to Good Times.
Yeah, right. He was Florida's husband. Remember that episode where she finds out James is dead on Good Times, and she throws the bowl down and goes, damn.
Yeah, Lear killed him off because he complained too much. Before we dive into this episode, I want to go back to we talked about the pilots. And I want to let people know the 2 pilots are available on YouTube, the first 2 pilots before the final one. And I suggest people watch it because it's interesting. It's very cringy not because the characters were bad per se, but they just were different and it just didn't feel right. And it's hard for me to even imagine if they stuck with some of the original cast members that were chosen.
Oh, yeah. It really, and it's the same material mostly that we get from the actual pilot that aired. And so it's fascinating to see this original take on it. I think they're great actors, but I don't think they have the chemistry that, that Rob Reiner and Sally Struthers wind up having. That, you really do feel as though this is a young couple. They feel like a young couple in love in a way that I think is very natural.
Yeah, they did. I agree with you.
I'm always so particularly taken by Sally Struthers' rapport with Carol O'Connor. I know that personally they had their issues on the set, but as characters, she is so clearly Archie Bunker's daughter. I mean, it's amazing to me. I think it's such a genius casting of Sally Struthers in that part. And we're talking about the issues that All in the Family brought and the revolution, how it revolutionized television because it dealt with issues such as racism, infidelity, impotence, this had never been on TV before. Abortion, rape, the Vietnam War in a sitcom, in a mainstream network sitcom, menopause, homosexuality, and in this episode, for lack of a better term, cross-dressing.
Yeah.
So the first episode we're going to talk about with Beverly LaSalle is called Archie the Hero, as we said. It was written by Lou Dermott and Bill Davenport and directed by Paul Bogart, with a guest star Laurie Shannon, who is a San Francisco drag queen, a big one too. I think he was like 6'5". And he plays a man who passes out in Archie's cab, and Archie basically saves his life by giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But of course, he's coming from the airport and he's in drag, so Archie is not aware of the fact that who he thinks is a she is actually a he.
Yeah. And, there have been a lot of different interpretations of the Beverly character. We should say that some people read the character as trans, some people read the character as a drag performer. And at the time that this episode was made, there was not a lot of consistency when it came to labels around gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation. And so I was very fortunate in that I was able to ask Norman Lear about this before he passed away. And he said essentially that they thought of the character of Beverly as being pretty much identical to the actor who played Beverly. This was a drag performer from San Francisco who had a character named Laurie Shannon that he performed on stage. And so, they basically, when they wrote the episode, what they had in mind was a male, basically what at the time they would have called probably a female impersonator, a man who performs as a woman. But I also think it is 100% valid to look at this episode and be like, Beverly is a trans woman. And so, I think there are a lot of different ways you could read the character. And I think that it is one of the strengths actually is that it is so, accommodating to different interpretations.
What I thought was interesting, Beverly says he is a female impersonator. But then a little later, he refers to himself as a transvestite. And transvestite at the time was kind of a catch-all term. Mm-hmm. Back when I talked with wonderful drag queen Coco Peru, she said that she, along with transgender individuals, were all called transvestites. And that was just what people called it. It was the label that they had. As I said, at that time, it was a catch-all.
Yeah. Oh, and I remember that continuing for a long time, even when I was, probably teenager or preteen, maybe around like early 90s or so. I remember there occasionally being sensationalistic stories about like man dressed as woman or, things like that just totally misunderstood what was going on. Often you would see transvestite or cross-dresser, terms that we might use today with a little more precision, but they were deployed in ways, especially by other by straight mainstream media. They were deployed in ways that I think we would look at today and be like, well, that's not quite right. That's not accurate. So even though Beverly says, I'm a transvestite, I don't think that is how that character would talk about themselves today. And I don't think that's how other people would talk about them.
Yes, I was kind of taken aback when I heard it, but it shouldn't have surprised me because I do know that was kind of the catch-all and the term was used very loosely.
Beverly LaSalle is a performer. He's not. So that therein lies the difference, correct? It's drag is a performance, transvestite is a personal.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, especially, if we're basing it off of how Norman says that they were conceiving of the character at the time. Their intent was for this to be a And we see, later on in one of the later episodes with Beverly, we see this. The intent was that the character was a man who performs as a woman. Now, that having been said, Beverly is often in drag or presenting female at times that a drag queen probably wouldn't actually, but it, is necessary for the comedic effect or for the drama of the episode or whatever. So I wouldn't say it's a realistic performance either way. But then again, it's television. At some point, you got to put your disbelief aside and just enjoy the story.
Yeah. What they did, they presented it in the sense that Beverly was always on his way back from a show or on his way to a show. And so they framed it in that so that they could have him in a dress for the laughs, but it made sense too.
Yes. And I think that, of course, the payoff of "Why Don't You Call Me Mister?"
Oh, yeah.
Right before the end of Act 1. I think that laugh has to rival the Sammy Davis Jr. kiss from the episode number 2. I mean, what a genius buildup. And to have that payoff.
Priceless.
I mean, and just to have Carol O'Connor's face. I mean, the take he does to the camera, to the audience. It's worth everything for the show. But I did notice something about the show, and I kept track of this. The F word. Not the F-bomb, the F word. I heard 3 fags and 1 fagula on that episode, which I thought was really interesting because in the next episode that we're going to talk about, I don't think I heard any of the
That's an interesting point. At the time, I think that word was not considered as... because I think the attitude was more like, well, the only people who are going to be offended by that are homosexuals, and who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I think by the time we get to the later Beverly episodes, there's a little bit more sensitivity at essentially the offices that we would call the censors. Their official term would have been something more like standards and practices.
Right.
But I think the people who were making the call about what is acceptable to air versus not, I think they would have been a little bit more sensitive to homophobic slurs. In part because queer people in the audience had been more vocal about their displeasure. But, as much as I like to villainize the censors and say, like, they're always bad, to be fair, they're not. Like, sometimes the censors, the standards and practices, did do good, important work. And one of the things that they did that was very important was saying, hey, wait a minute, this is offensive to this group, or this is insensitive, or this is giving the wrong idea. Even, Will and Grace had a big controversy because they used a slur in an early episode that, related to Rosario. And so I think it is important for there to be somebody who can say, like, all right, we've heard from a lot of different groups, a lot of different constituencies, and I think this is actually going to bum people out in ways that you're not aware of. So, I think maybe a good, and I can't say for sure that this was part of the conversation, but it wouldn't surprise me if eventually standards and practices were like, you can't use that word.
And that was during the time period that we were seeing George Jefferson using the N-word regularly.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's a great example of why context is so important. The way that a character uses it, their intent, and, whether it's commenting on the use of that slur. If it's for Archie just to say, to use a slur against somebody casually and for it to get a laugh, oh, that's awful. But, when somebody says it and they're meant to be the subject of ridicule for their ignorance, or they say it and then they get their comeuppance for having been so ignorant.
Exactly.
That really recontextualizes it. So I don't think it's correct to say, like, there should be a blanket ban on all bad words.
And also, what you have to remember, the character that's saying it. I mean, George Jefferson is the character saying it. Archie isn't saying it. So it's kind of like, I can say that, but you can't.
I believe the first time we heard him use it was the first episode of The Jeffersons. And it was funny because Archie's response was to look at Ediths and say something like, I haven't said that word in 3 years.
Yeah,
exactly. Yes, exactly.
Tony, you and I get excited when we get messages and emails and texts from listeners that tell us how much they enjoy the show.
We do.
But I think we should push it a little bit and ask them to go a little bit further.
Ooh, a challenge.
If you enjoy this show, let others know. 5 stars are great, whatever you want to give, except 1 star. If you have 1 star, say, that show's not for me and move on. We accept that.
Yeah, you don't give us 1 star. Just say, no, not for me. Just skip it. Or tell your friends. That's the best way too, right? Tell your friends, hey, I have this great fun podcast with these 2 kooky guys who talk about movies and TV. We run the gamut. We have everything.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're all over the place is a better way to put it.
But in a good way. So do it right now before you forget. Matt, when this came out in 1975, what was the country's response, both positive and negative?
Well, it was all over the map. One of the big concerns is that people would valorize Archie, that they'd think of him as the hero, like as the episode title even suggests. That people would be like, oh, Archie's so funny. His intolerance is so hilarious. I want to be like him. And there was a real concern that he was, I guess, normalizing that sort of behavior. What they found over time, given repeated exposure, and especially because Archie is often held up as the idiot and bigotry is often the target of ridicule, that over time, people would develop a sense that what he's doing actually isn't great. Casual exposure to Archie actually did. Often people would be like, oh yeah, haha, he's funny. The bigot is cool. Yeah. But over time, that effect really was mitigated. But that was one of the big worries. And then seeing specifically these queer characters on television, I mean, it was very mixed. A lot of people were like, I don't think it's appropriate. The president of the United States, Richard Nixon, was recorded on tape complaining about the show, about not these episodes, but another one that mentioned homosexuality. Mm-hmm. He was like, I don't think it's right to put that on television. So obviously there were a lot of people who were clutching their pearls and really distressed about it. I mean, not that Richard Nixon is anyone to, we're taking our moral cues from Richard Nixon.
Right. Not exactly the benchmark.
Yeah. But, obviously people who had an axe to grind, were able to focus their attention on this show.
It is the time too. And again, bringing this representation through a comedy. And I think another thing to mention about All in the Family, about Archie, and we talked about this with the Mary Tyler Moore, is the growth of the character too. Mm-hmm. I mean, the character grows throughout the 9 seasons of All in the Family and then beyond with Archie Bunker's Place, almost to the point where he's almost unrecognizable in the end as compared with a pilot episode. And I feel like that's what's so wonderful about this series and about a lot of these series is watching this character progression. Because yes, he's a buffoon and he's often the folly of his own, he's the mastermind of his own demise in so many ways, but he grows. Mm-hmm. He grows reluctantly through this, to the point where when we get to the third episode, because there's an episode before, Beverly LaSalle made another appearance the following year.
Yeah.
On All in the Family. And then the final appearance of Beverly LaSalle, Edith's Crisis of Faith in the 8th season, they cannot, Edith in particular, considers Beverly a friend, a member of the family, I believe she said.
Oh, yeah, very much. She says, you're like a sister to me. Well, like a brother. Well, all of them rolled into one. And it's so wonderful. And again, like, what a great thing for viewers to see if they maybe felt like, obviously everyone knows a queer person, whether they're aware of it or not. But for those viewers who are laboring under the misapprehension that they had never met a queer person, to see somebody who's so admirable as Edith, so pure of heart and so just a wonderful, generous, kind, loving person, for them to see like, oh, she can love a queer person. She can treat them as a family member. Well, maybe, if Edith can do it, if it's good enough for Edith, it's probably good enough for me.
You referred to a term, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, but you referred to something called bury the gays in one of your YouTube videos. And I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about that, because this episode does deal with, again, here's your spoiler alert, people, you heard it, death of Beverly LaSalle.
Yeah.
She's kind of serves the purpose of bringing this, Edith going through this crisis of faith. So could you tell us a little bit, Matt, what you mean by that term and how it applies in this particular episode?
Yeah. So, just on its own, a queer character dying isn't necessarily dramatically a bad thing. It's part of life and if you're depicting queer people, and part of our lives is that, like everybody else, nobody lasts forever. However, there's this pattern of repeatedly over lots of shows and lots of movies and lots of media that so often a queer person's death is a catalyst for growth with a straight character. And it's something that becomes very uncomfortable and unpleasant when taken in aggregate, that, oh, well, here comes another queer person getting killed, another death. And so it just becomes very tiresome and, I hate to say hacky. I'm not accusing All in the Family of being hacky and lazy with this episode, because I think it's a real amazing work of art. But it aligns with this trend, this very unfortunate trend of queer people dying so that something can happen to a straight person. The queer person's tragedy is really, it's all about the straight. Anyway, so I do think that you could argue that this episode, that the, Edith's Crisis of Faith, is part of that very unfortunate trope. I wouldn't say that it's gratuitous, though. I wouldn't say that it's just something that is thrown off and treated casually. I don't think it's something that's unnecessary. I think it's a really beautiful way to tell a story about, why this character, in part, one of the aspects of the story is why this person was so important to Edith and how she grapples with the loss of somebody who's very important. There's other shows that, kill queer characters a lot more casually. And I think it is treated with the gravity that it receives in this episode, I think, is something that I'm very grateful for.
I see it as different than when other queer characters are killed in the past. It's a different animal. I think it was important in this case because the point of the story was not Beverly's death per se. It was Edith's crisis of faith, as the title says. So they were left with, what character have we had on who people will know, but their loss won't have a huge impact in the long run of the show? And also, I think it was beautiful that it showed Beverly was someone Edith deeply loved. I mean, Carol O'Connor stands out in this show, and he was wonderful. But Gene Stapleton was amazing in this role.
Yeah.
If you watch the first episode of this part and then the second part, this is a woman who is confused and doesn't understand Beverly. But what's important to her is he was human. He was one of God's children, and we love everyone. She is so innocent and yet so perfect. It's the way the world should be.
Yeah, I think Edith is often referred to as the dumb one, or, like she doesn't know what's going on. People make fun of her for not being so bright. But I really do think that Edith is the most intelligent character on the show. She has an emotional intelligence that is way beyond what anyone else has. She understands people. She may not always be cognizant of what's in the news, but she gets what's going on with people. And I think her empathy is really her superpower. There's a great book about her called Edith the Good that was written, I think, by a priest or some religious leader wrote this book called Edith the Good. That is all about how she lives her life in a way that is very consistent with, spiritual ideals without even meaning to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's kind of, it's the idiot savant type thing, that these characters who seem on the surface not to be very bright and come up with the most profound statements and also the most profound meanings in what they say. And I don't know that, and Brad, I wanted to just go back on something you said about finding a character to kill off so Edith could have a crisis of faith. I don't know. I think it was very deliberate for Beverly LaSalle because this was a very popular character. I mean, she came back again the year before. And
I agree.
And also, as you pointed out, gay rights were really bubbling up here. Harvey Milk, the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California was happening at this time. So we were beginning to get more of a voice. And I think, it is kind of interesting how close they became, how close Edith and Beverly LaSalle came in that space of a year that suddenly they're family. But it is really impactful because of the fact that you believe it, first of all. But I think it was what was going on in the zeitgeist as well. As gay people were gaining more power, you also had to see, but there's also the danger here.
Yes. And I didn't mean to imply they just grabbed her out of the blue. I think there were two stories here. First was Edith struggling with her faith, which, if you know the character, is a powerful storyline. The second was addressing gay bashing, and they succeeded in both. They handled them beautifully.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, going off what you said, there's a point when she says to Michael, I don't know nothing, implying she's stupid. And I'm thinking, Edith, you are so far ahead of the rest of this family.
Again, character progression. Edith seems to get wiser and stronger as the series progresses, as Archie gets softer and keeps getting beat down and being shown how wrong-headed his prejudices are. And I think you mentioned Gene Stapleton, and I totally agree with you. Gene Stapleton won an Emmy this year, I think more for Edith's 50th birthday, because this was also the year of Edith's 50th birthday with the attempted rape. So this is quite a year. This was actually the last year of Mike and Gloria being on the show. So this was a big year for All in the Family. And they had these two episodes, which are kind of like cornerstones. They were both two-part episodes that showed Edith in particular going through real moments of crisis and character. And I was so moved by this episode and by Edith's reaction, by Edith, and also by Mike with Edith, that beautiful scene in the kitchen, which kind of brings Edith out of her depression. And then, of course, the hysterical, when she's starting to say grace at the end, it's so brilliant. That's what I love about this show, is the incredible blending of the sentiment with the humor. It's so fishy. I mean, that did you see the last shot where Archie's looking for the stuffing in the
he
pulls the stuff? I mean, I love that running. It's so great, and you can see Sally Struthers, Gloria saying, "I'm sorry." There's this, and it's just such a beautiful way to wrap up this very moving and profound episode.
Yeah, like a lot of sitcoms, there's so many shows that do a good job of handling, a touchy issue like homosexuality, not just homosexuality, but, when they have to have, one of those quote unquote very special episodes.
Right.
I think the ones that do it the best are the ones that move very dexterously between the serious moment and then into something funny. Like you need the something funny just to soften the blow after it comes. And I think that like that saying grace and the family being like, oh, but we just want to eat. It's such a funny gag.
It is a funny gag.
And I love when she's in the kitchen and she's distraught and Michael walks in and he says he's not hungry. And she comes back with, you can't depend on nothing no more. Mm-hmm. Wonderful levity in a tense scene.
Yeah, the episode is full of those incredible touches of humor with the seriousness. And it's a hallmark of All in the Family. As the show went on, too, it became more and more of a hallmark of All in the Family. And I think that it's so beautifully realized in this episode. Did you guys notice? Did you ever notice in the episode? And I'm sure Matt, I'm sure you've studied this episode, when Edith is reading the New York Times or whatever the paper is, the Queen's paper about Beverly being at Carnegie Hall, the ad for looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Oh no, I didn't notice that.
Did you notice that? I thought that was so great. I'm like, oh, it's 1977. This episode, I think I know what I'm going to say too. This episode. Talk about a crisis of faith. This episode aired on Christmas night in 1977.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, everybody. But really driving home the point of this, I think TV's first hate crime on Christmas night. Mm-hmm. Wow. That was a really ballsy move, CBS. That was something that was really, really brave of you to do, to air this 2-part episode on Christmas night. And this year it won Best Comedy Series, Actor, Actress, Supporting Actor, Director, and Writing. I mean, this was quite a year for All in the Family, considering it was also its penultimate year. It was a truly banner year and this episode is right up there with them.
Yeah, I really respect them for the risks that they took with the show. Obviously, not just with the Beverly episodes. There are a lot of really groundbreaking. I mean, you're talking about Edith's 50th birthday, for example. There's another Christmas episode about Vietnam and about what to do. About the conflicting ideas about whether it was a just war and all that stuff and how to treat a draft dodger who comes to Christmas, played, I think, by Austin Pendleton, who, another great, fantastic actor.
Yes, we love Austin Pendleton at the Going Hollywood pod.
Yeah. So, just incredible stuff and so brave and so bold in a way that I think, and here's the other thing about All in the Family that I think is so impressive. It is not a lavishly produced show. Like, it's not expensive, at least not on screen. Like, the actors obviously are getting paid what they are worth, hopefully.
Yes.
And so there's that expense. But this isn't a show that's like special effects and location shoots. It is what you might call I don't want to call it a cheap show. I wouldn't say it's a cheap show because obviously there's a lot of money going into making the writing, the story, and the acting and all that stuff good and directing. But this is a show that does not require a lot of production resources.
Right.
So
they didn't need to.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I think that's something that when you look at TV and like it all has to be prestige television, it has to look like a film today. I think a show that looks, like handmade, I think that's one of the things that makes the show really work well and something that I miss on television today.
But I wish Norman Lear had taken the time and spent the money to zoom in on a house that really had a front porch. It will bother me till the day I die. It drives me
I drove by that house, but it looks
crazy.
nothing like it did obviously. That was 50 years ago, but it's in Queens and it looks nothing like.
And another thing about this episode in Edith, I think if you looked at the audio track only, you would be surprised at how little Jean Stapleton spoke. So much was said with her face and her body language.
Yeah.
Because she couldn't speak. She was so distraught and she kept saying, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to say. Yeah. It was so powerful with so few words.
She's a very incredibly skilled actress. And an actress who, considering that before this series, her primary body of work was on the stage. She's, the littlest gesture. Same with Carol O'Connor. An eyebrow raise, a side glance tells you volumes about these people and what they're going through and what they're feeling. And I think what strikes me about these episodes we were talking about, there's not a huge budget. This script is so tight Both of these episodes, they really are plays. I was so struck by that because we were so used to, I love Modern Family. I think Modern Family is one of the funniest shows and one of the best shows of the past 20 years. But you see how segmented Modern Family is. And this shot, and this shot, and this shot. This is a play. These are plays we're watching. They are so tightly structured and so well structured that you're right, Matt. They could be on the stage. They were on a stage in Hollywood being videotaped.
Yeah, they're on a soundstage. Yeah.
And they actually could go on a stage with, I think that's a fantastic idea. They're so brilliantly, tightly written. There is not one wasted moment in either one of these episodes.
Yeah, it's great. It's very tight. And, what you see there is a product of a certain style of production where they would shoot, they'd work on the episode. They would do a rehearsal run. I think I can't remember if it was with an audience or not. I don't think it was. They do a rehearsal run, they'd break, they'd make a lot of revisions, they'd come back. And this was a show where the actors were really invited to contribute, to make their suggestions. While they're working on the show, Rob Reiner is spending a lot of time up in the booth. He's learning to be a director by watching the production of this show.
And he got kind of good at it.
Yeah, he picked up some good lessons, clearly.
Oh, something I wanted to mention. There were a couple of moments where I'm like, well, this has to be an improvisation that they worked out. There's a scene in the first episode we talked about, Archie the Hero, that takes place in Kelsey's bar, where Archie's hands are so close to Beverly's chest, and he accidentally touches her chest and then pulls it back. And I'm like, that had to be an ad lib. I'm sure that wasn't in the script. I'm sure that was worked out when they were rehearsing. And it's little moments like that, or like when in the second episode when Beverly comes around and puts her hands over his eyes, and he puts his head back and says something about rubber. That's an awful lot of rubber. And, he's putting his head one way, then the other. I'm like, these have got to have been ad-libbed moments. They're so brilliant. And so much of the character, I can't help but think they would have been.
I wonder, yeah, I don't want to discount the incredible writing, because a lot of the writers for the show are people who came from either theater or from doing, television that was like anthology style, or, people who are used to writing for comedy variety shows that would have a live audience. So these were really experienced live show writers. Clearly this is a show where everybody can contribute their ideas, and everyone's doing, everyone's thinking about what would make a good show for the audience.
Right. Well, Milt Josephsberg, used to write for Bob Hope. And he worked for Lucy for ages. And Bob Schiller and Bob Weisskopf were writers on I Love Lucy. So these are people who have a long history in the sitcom.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason why these shows are so tight and so well constructed and just are wonderful examples.
Yep.
This is the type of show, and this is a bad comparison, but it's the only one that comes to mind. On Green Acres, they were never allowed to go off script. They were required to follow it verbatim. On this show, you can see, say, Sally Struthers speaking up and say, Gloria would never say that. Gloria would never do that.
That's one of the beautiful things about doing these characters for so long, is they knew these characters so well. And that's why, as the series progresses, it just gets richer and richer and richer. Is there anything else we want to say about these two wonderful episodes of All in the Family, or our fabulous guest, Matt Baume?
Oh, wow. That's thank you. I guess what I want to say is thank you so much for starting this conversation, for inviting me on, and for, bringing All in the Family to folks, because, it can feel a little passé, like an old, this is from a million years, before I was born. And I think it's just such a wonderful show that, despite its age, it holds up so well. And, I think it's something that people will really be glad to have discovered if they are not familiar with it yet already.
Yes.
I agree. And people, please go read Matt's book, Hi, Honey, I'm Homo. It's also available on Audible, which is how I read it, quote unquote read. My favorite way to read is to listen. Tell us again your YouTube channel so people can find out more about you, because I think it's fabulous.
Yes, indeed. So my YouTube channel, it's just my name, Matt Baume, Mattbaume. I do videos about television and film history from a queer perspective. So I just did one about the movie Cabaret and their inclusion of a queer character in that, and what it has to say about resisting fascism and how queer people are a part of that. I've also done videos recently about television in the 1970s and how actual queer people, queer organizers pushed for TV to do better because the representation wasn't always as good as All in the Family. And I'm working on some videos right now about Howard Ashman and the Disney Renaissance, and how gay New York theater of the 1970s really left a big imprint on Disney movies that we cherish today. And then I've got some more stuff coming about My So-Called Life, and about some of the more 90s shows as well. So that's all on my YouTube channel. Matt Baume is my name, and that's the channel.
And Matt's YouTube channel and his podcast and his book are all the same in 3 ways. You learn a lot, they're interesting, and Matt is entertaining at the same time, and that is not an easy skill.
Yes, very true.
Thank you so much.
You are one busy man, and we're so,
Yeah.
so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much. And Brad,
Yes, Tony.
let's not say goodbye. Let's just say au revoir.
No, let's say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.